No, read everyone. Now, thank you so much for joining us. You can please believe that I'm not happy on which KC and pleasures me. My name is Matt Confield, and I'm having the privilege of being the director of Advice Services here at Toynbee Hall. This, if you haven't been in before, I know some people, surprisingly, and they're the very first time. This has been out over in East End of London for just over 140 years. And for that, more than 125 years now, we've been providing the world's longest continuous drive free legal advice centre right here on the Society of the East End. Now, I will try and tell you more about 140-year history, as we're all going to speak for another 30 years as a colleague, just a couple of reminding for today. What goes to stay for 30 minutes short, I say short, but over 140 years worth of history and video to tell you all about this place and what we're doing today.
Hi guys, I'm so excited to be here at Toynbee Hall, the epicenter for so many amazing opportunities in the heart of East London, 140th celebration, and I'm here with Matt. Matt, can you tell us about Toynbee Hall?
This is the same building that we've had since 1884. It's our original building, founded by the Barnetts because they wanted to look at social reform, and rather than just kind of speak about people that are living in poverty, come and live with them and learn from them. And that ethos of learning from people with lived experience still is what we do every day.
Toynbee Hall is a proud reflection of the community it resides in. From debt advice to legal advice, and pretty much anything you can think of is dealt with here at Toynbee Hall.
On Christmas Eve 1884, Toynbee Hall opened its doors in the heart of East London. Samuel and Henrietta Barnett had a bold vision to bring together privileged university graduates and the working poor to tackle the systemic inequalities of Victorian society.
So when I talk about the history of Toynbee Hall, I always start with the Barnetts, a married couple, Henrietta and Samuel. I always like to say that the money was from Henrietta. They saw great social need, but they also saw great economic progress.
The Barnetts believed in the transformative power of education, empathy, and collaboration.
Toynbee Hall quickly became a beacon of social reform. It attracted some of the brightest minds of the time, including William Beveridge and Clement Attlee, both deeply inspired by the work they witnessed here.
William Beveridge volunteered at Toynbee Hall as a young man.
Here he saw firsthand the struggles of workers trapped in the cycles of poverty.
These experiences would shape his groundbreaking 1942 Beveridge Report,
the blueprint for the welfare state.
Clement Attlee, who served as Toynbee Hall's warden, carried its ethos with him into politics.
As Prime Minister, he championed fairness and equality, creating the NHS and housing reforms that transformed Britain.
This small building in East London became the cradle of ideas that would change the nation forever.
In 1898, Toynbee Hall established the Poor Man's Lawyer Service.
This service, now known as Free Legal Advice Centre, was founded on the principle that justice should be accessible to all, regardless of income.
From 1929 to 1953, Toynbee Hall housed the Inner London Juvenile Court, one of the earliest courts dedicated to youth justice, focusing on rehabilitation over punishment, setting a precedent for juvenile justice reform.
During the early 20th century, Toynbee Hall served as a vital meeting place for suffragettes, supporting the movement for women's right to vote and housing key figures in the fight for gender equality. In 1939, as World War II loomed, Toynbee Hall became one of the first sites to host a Citizens Advice Bureau, providing essential guidance to East Londoners navigating the challenges of wartime.
In 1965, Toynbee Hall was the venue for the inaugural meeting of the Child Poverty Action Group, sparking a movement dedicated to eradicating child poverty in the UK.
Addressing the dire housing conditions in East London, Toynbee Hall collaborated to advocate for urban redevelopment, influencing national housing policy,
contributing to the establishment of minimum wage laws and labour protections.
The impact of Toynbee Hall's early work laid the foundation for a legacy of change.
Today, that legacy continues. Together, we can take the lessons of the past and apply them to the challenges of today.
As inequalities deepen, Toynbee Hall's mission to break down systematic barriers has never been more critical. At the heart of what we do is our commitment to providing free expert advice to those facing some of life's toughest challenges. We lead the Debt-Free Advice Partnership that together support nearly 20,000 people every year.
I'm a single mum and I've got 2 children.
I'm disabled and I have a long-term illness.
I was just finding it difficult to keep up the repayments. It was just too much.
You're so anxious, and you feel like you can't tell anybody about it.
I felt so ashamed, that I couldn't keep my children safe and warm.
One day, I got a letter from my creditor. I panicked. I thought I need help.
After talking to a debt advisor, couldn't believe why I didn't seek help earlier.
That brought huge relief to me.
They put me on a breathing space scheme, a kind of payment holiday.
We talked through my options and they helped me come up with a repayment plan.
The staff were kind and helpful. Now there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Now I actually feel like I'm getting somewhere.
I am forever grateful to them.
I just don't live in fear anymore.
I can't wait to get on with my life.
It's just made a huge impact on my life, so thank you.
From our advice hub at Toynbee Hall on Commercial Street, we deliver face-to-face support to those in need. Through video advice kiosks, we've expanded access to financial guidance, allowing clients to connect with advisors in libraries, community hubs, and even prisons. These kiosks ensure that nobody is facing financial hardship alone. In partnership with Guy's and St Thomas's charity, we provide tailored financial inclusion advice to NHS frontline staff, recognising the unique pressures they face. For those recently diagnosed with a terminal cancer, our Macmillan-funded welfare benefit service provides critical support at a time of immense emotional and financial strain. Additionally, we offer free legal advice in partnership with leading law firms. These sessions address urgent housing and employment issues, ensuring individuals can defend their rights. We work with our closest two primary schools to offer free and accessible child-led play and nature-based learning opportunities for children in the community. We also co-design programs with young people to address the fact that places where they could have traditionally turned to for emotional support are stretched to the limit. We're not just addressing the symptoms of poverty, we're tackling the root causes.
And I'd really draw people's attention to participant action research, which is about bringing the research and the people who are the researched about together and flipping control of the process, have control of the questions that are asked, and together come up with recommendations and conclusions, ensuring that people with lived experience are centred in that process.
Toynbee Hall is really special because of the unique combination of services that work together. If you come during the day, you can see our community centre with elderly residents learning how to sew or do art.
Oh, my name is Rosia Ansa. Everybody call me Rosia. I am myself alone at home. When I come here, really I got a lot of friends and all are helping each other.
I've made a pair of trousers with Kaylee's help. She brought me through the whole process of how to do it, so that was really good.
They are encouraging me. When I come here, I enjoy it. And no depression, no stress. I'm so happy for here.
Are you doing any other classes?
Singing, yeah.
My favorite is the computer. Before, I don't know how to send email. Now I become the content creator. And then I share my painting also in the Facebook.
It means everything to me. It's the highlight of my week.
I say big thanks to Toynbee. Toynbee is doing very great, very great.
Toynbee Hall is for anyone who walks through the door.
I mean, I hope that one day Toynbee Hall doesn't need to exist and we can sell the building and move out, because poverty in London will be completely eradicated. But until that day, our team will work tirelessly to support those that do need us.
I would really like it if the next 140 years is about how we did that in a way that was collaborative and centred on the people living here.
What strikes me is just the number of staff and trustees that grew up at Toynbee Hall, coming and using the services, and now have returned as staff members or volunteering their time.
Toynbee Hall is a movement that includes clients, advisors, partners and supporters, all working together towards a common goal. Your support can help us scale our impact, reaching more communities, challenging more injustices, and ensuring that no one is left behind, with every debt settled, every voice amplified, and every life transformed.
140 years is just the beginning.
140 years is just the beginning.
140 years of impact, just the beginning.
The quickest 140 years you've ever seen in 7.5 minutes. So with that, that's enough for me. I'd like to pass over to our chair this evening. Alexandra, it's a real pleasure to introduce you and someone who's got such a commitment to justice and public service. It's truly inspiring. Alexandra has championed access to justice throughout her career as a lawyer, a judge, and a passionate advocate for program your work. We're so honoured to have you this night and share our session.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for that. So generous introduction, Matt. And I'm really honoured and privileged to be here this evening to chair this evening's proceedings and to introduce our guest speaker, who is, of course, in the right arm, Sarah Sackman KC, Minister of State for Arts and Legal Services. Before that, she was the Secretary General. And she is, of course, big friend of what we call the iconic seat of Finchley and Golders Green. So, welcome very much, Sarah. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you're going to say. I just want to make a few introductory remarks because since my very early days as a lawyer, I have been involved in monitoring activities of various kinds. And I wanted to share with you some of the I suppose inspiring suggestions, comments, words that it got me involved in the hope that the retelling of those inspirational words will have a similar impact on you. So first of all, to those of you who get in the audience who are lawyers or aspiring to be lawyers, I would simply say, do not underestimate the power of your voice simply by being a lawyer. And the reason I say that, again, is from my direct experience, and this was in fact how I became involved as volunteer. As a law student, I was at law school at the time, and I wasn't even qualified as a lawyer. And someone came along to talk to us about Amnesty International and said, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I encourage all of you who are about agricultural violence to become involved because, unlike me, when you write your letters protesting about people who've been incarcerated as political prisoners or extrajudicial executions or whatever it may be, other abuses or human rights, you can say, unlike the rest of us, I am a lawyer. And so what you are doing is not just outrageous, immoral, unprincipled, wrong, but you can say it's also unlawful. And that is a very powerful message to send. And I'm bound that such a strong message that I became involved in Injury, and I still am involved in Amnesty International. I chaired the international charity for 10 years because I felt it was part of my responsibility as a lawyer to use that voice to speak up for others. And the second, very inspirational, I suppose, realization came to me was that if you're involved in pro bono, you should, as a professional person, do to the best of your ability, whether paid or not, your professional duty and apply the same high standards to your pro bono clients as you do to your pay clients. And that, I think, is a fundamental principle of pro bono activity. I must say, having been on the receiving end sometimes for some of the charities in which I'm involved, I'm slightly frustrated that our lawyers, generous so they are in giving their time, aren't exactly speedy to respond. So I feel very strongly that you have to treat all your clients in the same way, whether they're paying or not. I know the Minister is going to say, and because I've had a sneak preview of her speech, that legal pro bono advice and support is no substitute for a properly funded legal system. And I must say, this is my third learn, that sitting as I do in the Crown Court, the High Court, and the tribunals, I'm really appalled by the number of unrepresented litigants I see. And the reason for that is that, of course, there is no equality of arms against their almost always represented opponents, whoever they may be. And as a result, of course, those unrepresented litigants are gravely disadvantaged. Naturally, it is my responsibility as a judge to try and support them as much as possible.
explaining the law, explaining the procedure, that I always have to say to them, I can't present your case for you. I can't ask the questions that you want to ask. And just one example, not actually from courts, but from my time as a criminal cases review commissioner, was that there was a study on the predictive factors of what features of your case, if you were an applicant, were most likely to result in your case being referred to the appeal boards as a potential miscarriage of justice. And I was as amazed as I think many of my colleagues were to discover that the number one predictive factor was whether or not you were represented. And what was particularly shocking about that was that when I started at the CCRC in 2012, approximately 30% of our applicants were legally represented. Of course, you don't have to do the maths, that, and 70% were not. But even more shockingly, now the proportion of legally represented applicants is approximately 3%. So I want to move on to my penultimate point. As a Law Society council member now, rather a long time ago, there was a very popular media narrative about legal fat cat lawyers. And this, I thought, was great distortion of what was then, less so now, interestingly, although ironically the situation has deteriorated since then, about the cuts in legal aid. And I think it was perceived, to certainly presented by much of the media, of these being legal aid lawyers trying to feather their own nests, improve their rate of remuneration. Totally failing to appreciate the reality, which is that those lawyers were desperate to support their clients who are at risk of losing their home, maybe their children, their job, their life savings, their liberty, their mental or physical health. And yet they couldn't get proper legal representation because the lawyers didn't need to worry in anything like the same way as those clients they were representing, because many of them could, and sadly did, move into more lucrative areas of work. So it wasn't to support the lawyers. Actually, it was a plea to support those clients they were no longer going to be able to represent. And I felt very strongly there, as I do now, that we are all only one catastrophe away from a similar situation. Car accident, a bereavement, all sorts of things leave people in really desperate straits. And finally, I just want to stress from a personal perspective, which I hope you will learn from too, the power of pro bono across disciplines. Now, my experience of supervising junior lawyers working on pro bono matters within my own city firm was that often they reached a point where they got stuck because they realised that the client had a problem which wasn't just solely legal problem. They needed tax advice, or they needed surveying advice, or they needed some other kind of professional advice, and we as solicitors simply couldn't provide it. So I was delighted now several years ago to share a programme run by Business in the Community, which you may have come across, called ProHelp, which brought together professionals from all sorts of disciplines, architects, surveyors, tax advisors, accountants, and what have you, who worked collectively on pro bono projects. So that if it got to the point where you needed somebody from a different discipline, then you could call on them because you knew that they were able to provide that pro bono support from their own professional perspective. I saw some absolutely marvellous examples of those collective pro bono projects. Now, sadly, that programme came to an end without funding, a common story. But I have been very keen to resuscitate that idea through the Livery Movement, of which I'm a member. I am a Livery Movement court member of the Solicitors Worship Company. I'm actually also chair of that company's charity committee. And in that capacity, I attended a conference in Pro Bono, where I met Bob Harris, who is the chair of the Power Delivery Pro Bono group. That brings together representatives of the delivery movement, which of course includes many, many professions as well as trades and guilds. And I'm really hopeful that we are able to replicate that multidisciplinary model for pro bono through the delivery movement. So with that, I think that you have found some interesting thoughts there to ponder. And with that, I'd very much like to hand over to our main speaker, Sarah Sackman.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here tonight. It's absolutely wonderful to be back at Toynbee Hall. When you invited me to speak, I leapt at the chance because, quite simply, this place means a great deal to me. It encapsulates so much of my family's history, my identity as a Londoner, my professional path, and my journey into politics. Over a century ago, my ancestors were just some of the many immigrants who arrived in this part of London. There were waves of immigrants, Irish, Southeast Asian, and in my family's case, Eastern European Jewish immigrants. The East End was a bustling, overcrowded melting pot, marked by poverty, yes, but also promise. These people had aspirations, dreams, a commitment to their community and to this country. Many of them stood up to fascism and embodied the working class aspiration to build a better and fairer future. And in the process, they redefined this nation. Now, they were not the only ones who rolled up their sleeves and got stuck into the task of driving social change. When Samuel and Henrietta Barnett established Toynbee Hall, they kick-started a movement. In 19th century London, life expectancy was short. Child mortality was high. And for many, including my own family, living conditions were appalling. Confronted with the dire poverty of Whitechapel, the Barnetts decided to do something about it. When they saw injustice, they acted. And so, as you saw in the video, Toynbee Hall was born. A place where students and social reformers came to live and work alongside the people who they were trying to empower and whose lives they were trying to improve. History doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And the very same people who set up Toynbee also created the Hampstead Garden suburb, a settlement in northwest London built on the principles of social reform. Now, my family eventually moved out of the East End, first to Stamford Hill, then to Wembley, and eventually to the suburb, which is now in the heart of the constituency which I represent as the Member of Parliament for Finchley and Golders Green. And those strong ties between the suburb, St Jude's and Toynbee Hall remain to this day, and I'm delighted that a number of people involved with the Proms at St Jude's, which raises awareness and money for Toynbee Hall and some of the brilliant projects you saw in the video, that those ties remain strong and deep today. Toynbee is woven into the fabric of this country's political history. As you saw, William Beveridge drew inspiration here before writing his seminal report, which laid the foundation for the post-war welfare state. Clement Attlee lived and worked here before he became Prime Minister. And in 1949, Attlee went on to introduce legal aid in this country. And as Minister for Courts and Legal Aid, I reflect on and am proud of the place this has played in the ideas which forged our modern welfare state and legal aid system. Toynbee Hall began offering legal advice in 1898. establishing what was then called the Poor Man's Lawyer Service for those who couldn't afford legal representation. And since its inception, it has become the longest-running free legal advice service anywhere in the world, helping thousands of people. What began as a single solicitor is now a thriving operation with over 100 volunteers. And this is also where I, as a young law student, and then as a pupil and junior barrister, began volunteering on a Wednesday evening at the Free Legal Advice Centre. My time at Toynbee taught me more about law than anything that I could learn in a lecture theatre. It was here that I first understood that law is not just a theory or an arid academic subject in books, but that it can be a practical force for good. And I'd see it in action, helping shield families from eviction, supporting people to get out of debt, helping them with immigration issues. I remember one woman in particular, a recently bereaved widow who came into FLAC when she'd been served with an eviction notice. Understandably, she was in some distress. She wasn't sure where she was going to live. Did she have friends who could put her up? Would she end up on the streets? And it was clear to me, even as a very junior lawyer, that the notice was wrong, that it was based on a mistake, because when her partner had passed away, the tenancy should have passed automatically to her. And I remember picking up the phone to the local authority and saying, hang on, you've made a mistake here, and following that up with a letter. As a result, the eviction notice was overturned. Now, there were no heroics here. This was just the right legal support at the right time. But what that story underscores is why advice centres like the Free Legal Advice Centre here at Toynbee, why they're so important. Because it's about knowing your rights, having a service that recognises your dignity and empowers you with the tools to navigate a system that is meant to support you, but all too often oppresses people. Now, one of the special ways that Toynbee does this is through its volunteers. And I took inspiration not just from the clients that I was able to help, but the friends that I made here. Some of them are here tonight. I won't embarrass all of them, but Naomi, Tom, Richard, there was Philip, there was Sean, Ellen, amazing lawyers spanning family, crime, and civil. Lawyers who embody the very best of the legal profession and who, through their practice, which they carry on today, uphold the integrity of our justice system. The other remarkable thing about Toynbee is the sensitivity with which it serves the population around it. I was delighted to see today, on my visit earlier today, that the women's only Free Legal Advice Centre on Saturdays with Bengali translators is still running. And I got to meet a group this afternoon who had just had their English language class. And when I asked them, what do you like about coming here? They said two things. They love learning English, and they love the friendships they made, the relationships that made them feel less isolated in their community. And I reflect that with that latest wave of migration, many of the challenges that my own family would have encountered when they came to this country, those challenges are now being met by a place like Toynbee for the latest generation, empowering those people to give voice to their legal rights in a language that they understand is something that you here at Toynbee can be very proud of. Because that's the beauty of it. Whoever you are and whatever your background, support is there. Now, I share these stories about Toynbee Hall, not just out of nostalgia. It's because the time that I spent here was formative. It shaped the lawyer I wanted to be, and it now shapes the Minister of Justice that I wish to be. Toynbee taught me that equal access to justice is foundational and is a foundation upon which our society is built. Because if you know that the justice system is there for you, no matter your background, you know that there is an ultimate defense against people who may try to exploit you. When you equip people to know their rights, then they can advocate for themselves, not just in the courtroom, but in their daily lives. If you're trying to negotiate with an unfair landlord, protect yourself from an unscrupulous boss, leave a relationship which is an unhappy one, knowing that you can access justice means that you know the power that you have. And it means that we can create a society where the power of law isn't just confined to law firms and courtrooms, it's pushed down our social system into the hands of every single individual. And that's why early legal advice matters. That's why law centres like the one here at Toynbee matter. That's why legal aid matters. Let me be clear, you've already heard the headline of the talk. As valuable as pro bono is, and it is incredibly valuable, it can never be a substitute for a justice system and a legal aid system that is properly resourced, sustainable, and effective. It's a crucial part of our justice ecosystem, but it isn't and should not be the answer to the years of neglect and underfunding in our legal aid system. Yet sadly, all too often, it has been asked to paper over the cracks created in the past 14 years. When our government came into office, we inherited a justice system close to breaking point. Record backlogs across all of our courts, criminal, civil, family. Rising delays in our tribunals from asylum to housing, and a legal aid system under intense pressure. All of this has a profound human cost. Our social fabric is worn thin whilst individuals' waits for justice gets longer and longer. If there's no one able or available to advise you, how can you know what your rights are? We need to restore a system when people know that they can enforce their rights, and in which those who break the rules know they can't get away with it. I'm determined that we strengthen our legal aid and legal support system, and that we democratise legal support for the modern age. That effort to rebuild our system is already underway. So let me share a little bit about what we're doing 1 year, almost a year, into government. When I came into this role, I asked myself 3 questions. 1, how do we deliver legal support and legal aid in the most impactful way? 2, how do we make sure that the resources that we have meet the needs of the most vulnerable? And 3, how do we ensure that the system that Clement Attlee dreamt of here is fit for the future? Firstly, we have to invest. To deliver legal advice and legal aid in an impactful way, we have to address the chronic underfunding that's been left in the sector. So we've gotten to work on that front. First, in criminal legal aid. Our criminal legal aid lawyers, both solicitors and barristers, do a tough but vital job. And so that's why, in December, we announced that we'd be investing £92 million annually in additional funding to the criminal legal aid sector and to prison lawyers. That builds upon the £24 million uplift that we've invested in those solicitors who do vital work as duty solicitors in police stations and in our youth courts. On the civil side, we are investing an additional £20 million in the areas of housing and immigration. That's a sector that hasn't seen a pay rise since 1996. But we've made that investment. How do we make sure that we target resource so that people get early advice and that the most vulnerable are supported? We've got to make sure that resources are working for those who are most in need. And we know the difference that early legal advice can make to both identifying people's legal problems and helping to resolve them. That's why we've invested £6 million this year in legal support. That supports around 60 organisations right across the country, from citizens' advice branches to law centres. Places like Toynbee, organisations rooted in their local communities that understand local needs and how best to tailor support to them. And thirdly, how do we make it fit for the future? We have to modernise. If we want a legal aid system that truly serves the people it's meant to, we need to modernise how it works, not just how much it pays. And we need a system shaped around the needs of the people who rely on it, supported by better and smarter use of technology. When we spoke to people who receive legal aid and those who work in the system, the providers, they described a system that was archaic, that was clunky, solicitors having to spend hours on administrative tasks for billing instead of actually listening and representing their clients. It's inefficient, it's clunky, and it takes the professionals away from the job they want to be doing and they should be doing. So over this Parliament, I want to see us improve the way that legal aid is delivered. Some of you may have heard that in the last week alone, our IT system at the Legal Aid Agency has suffered a malign and pretty catastrophic attack by criminals trying to steal people's data. But what that shows is just how fragile the system is. Now, the first thing we've got to do is deal with those criminals. But what it shows is that the system needs transformation. And we've allocated over £23 million this financial year to kickstart that programme of transformation and change, building a system that is clear, quicker and easier to use. And crucially, as the ethos of Toynbee teaches us, build around the needs of those that it serves. So I want to come back to where we began, sitting in this amazing hall where we used to eat curry on a Wednesday night before going and giving the best legal advice that I could muster. And I think about that. And I think about the lessons that I learned here in Whitechapel and how I can advocate for those now that I'm in Whitehall. When Samuel and Henrietta Barnett founded this place 150 years ago, I don't think they could have imagined the movement that they unleashed. They believed in access to justice, not just as an ideal, but as a lived reality. And you here at Toynbee carry on that legacy today. That's the task before us, to take the spirit of the Barnetts, their imagination, their courage to do things differently, and use it to build something better. A legal support system that is modern, that is more accessible, one that respects the professionals who deliver it and makes access to justice a reality for everyone. It won't happen overnight, no quick fixes, but the work is already underway. So to Toynbee Hall, to your staff, to your volunteers, I say thank you. Thank you for reminding us what's possible when compassion, purpose and community come together. This government is grateful for all you do, and I take inspiration from it. We are determined to build a future that honours your past, and by delivering the justice system your work has always stood for. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Nelson Denis-Smith, who is, like me, the solicitor, and has had an extraordinary career, which she might touch on. She started at St. Clair, where I practiced myself for years, set up her own business. And in fact, we met each other through the first 100 Years project, which I'm sure Donna is going to tell you about, which is now transmogrified into the next one. It's brilliant. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll talk to you about not so much poor man's law, but poor woman's law. Throughout the last 100 years, I think we have observed a remarkable lineage of women lawyers that have fought for the rights of women, especially those with limited means. And we've heard the minister, she herself stands on this lineage herself, having built on the heritage of many of the ones that paved the way for us to be here today. So I wanted to invite you today on a journey through the remarkable story of some of the women lawyers that have worked pro bono in the legal sector. And the story begins with daring pioneers like Harry Morrison, Maud Crofts, and Helena Normanton, and continues with the passionate advocates of today. These women didn't just break into a male-dominated profession because the law was not open to them until 1919 for women to become lawyers. They also used the legal skills they picked up early in their careers to fight for the vulnerable, to champion women's rights, and to transform the very meaning of justice. And I want to give you some names to take away. The first woman to get a law degree in this country was Eliza Orme at UCL. She graduated late in the 19th century. She never got to practice because the law was not a profession open to women at the time. But even with her limited knowledge of the law, she collaborated with women's organizations and was a legal advisor to suffrage groups, helping women understand their rights and navigate the legal system at a time when all legal professionals were men. Kristen Macmillan is another woman who, although came to law only in 1923 when she was finally admitted to the bar, spent all her time in 1906 went to House of Lords to argue that women should have a vote. Maud Crofts is one of the women that challenged the Law Society to open its door to women. She was part of a group of 4 women led by Gwyneth Bebb. Once she eventually qualified, and she was the first woman to pick up her solicitor's roles in 1923. She took to the airwaves, she became a BBC presenter, and she had a kind of woman's hour, but with legal rights for women. In these times, you have to remember, women not only didn't know about their rights, but they had hardly any rights. So Maud Crofts was a woman really of formidable intellect and unyielding determination. She came from a well-off family. She studied history at Girton in Cambridge. And her sense of injustice was very much started at an early age because she was outraged that her father's gardener had a vote, but she, an educated woman, didn't. And this conviction propelled her into the suffrage movement, and she became a real passionate orator and campaigner for women's rights. She was also the first one to write a book about women's rights because as eventually women got the vote and more legislation came through, they understood very early on that not knowing your right was a barrier to women. But also, once they qualified, women weren't getting the briefs because they were quite new to the legal profession. And I think in a cunning kind of way, they realized that there was a market in there. You know, if you educate women about their rights, they will come to instruct you to represent their rights. So there was a really wonderful story because a lot of the early women pioneers in the legal profession actually had a lot of female clients that nobody else wanted to represent before them. She was, as I said, a tireless advocate for women and children and was a legal advisor to a group called the 6 Point Group, which was a group set up by Lady Rhonda, who had a battle about being recognized in the House of Lords, and you can read all about her. But she campaigned for equality for women in 6 areas. And the original priorities included legislation on child assault, equal pay for teachers, but became refined into political, occupational, moral, social, and economic, legal kind of aspects. So they were quite structured in what they were trying to campaign for. Her pro bono work was deeply personal. She believed it was an intolerable hardship that a woman at a time perhaps of great need should have to face a male judge, supported only by a male advocate, who is often quite unable to express his client's point of view. And that takes me to perhaps the most loud of the campaigners in the pioneering cohort of women, but a woman who has achieved so many firsts. It will take me 140 years to maybe list them all. Helena Normanton KC was the first woman to take silk in this country in 1949. She was also the first woman, a little bit like Toynbee Hall, on Christmas Eve. She presented herself to her inn, Middle Temple, to be admitted, and she was in 1919, the day of the royal assent of the legislation that opened the profession to women. She was a very determined woman. Christmas will not get in her way to be admitted and make first. She was a relentless campaigner even before that for women's rights, and advocated for married women to retain their own money and property, and for divorce law reform. She was also the first woman to get a passport in her maiden name because she didn't like her husband's name, Clark. And she took action, and she therefore allows women, even to this day, to have a professional name and also a married woman's name. And we have to thank her for that. She, in her legal work, often focused on supporting women in vulnerable positions, and she mentored very, very many women coming into the legal profession and wanting to be like her. She had an incredible commitment pro bono work, not least because a lot of the time she struggled for work. So it was her way of keeping her legal mind engaged. But she came from a family where she lost her dad quite young, and her first brush with the law when she realized her mother could not advocate for herself, and she stepped in as a teenager to help her mother get some of the rights following her father's death. And that early experience as a child really informed how she fought for more rights for women, and she never stopped doing that until she died. Another amazing woman was Mona Wilson, and she set up something called the Working Women's Legal Advice Bureau, not here at Toynbee Hall, but maybe there is some link here locally. And that was quite early on and very, very much ahead of its time. And this service provided free legal advice to working class women, often referring cases to sympathetic solicitors who were willing to take pro bono work. This bureau played a pivotal role in supporting women's trade unions and feminist causes, and was instrumental in bringing the Bebb versus Law Society case that I mentioned, which eventually, although it failed, really opened the profession to women to become solicitors. And now I want to tell you about a woman who is linked to this place, and that is Carrie Morrison. Carrie Morrison, or sometimes known as the reluctant trailblazer, was also somebody that became known as a poor man's lawyer. She was the first woman to be admitted as a solicitor in England and Wales in December 1922. She quickly earned this reputation as a poor man's lawyer, providing law fee or pro bono services for women in desperate circumstances. She often represented sex workers in court, a controversial and courageous choice at the time, and she also advocated for divorce law reform, believing in the fairness and dignity for all women. In 1928, she became the first woman to take a divorce case under the poor person's rules. She was regarded by her contemporaries as the senior woman solicitor, as the first. And her background, though, was very interesting and very humble. Her grandfather was a labourer, and on the other side, she was from a Scottish innkeeper background. Her mother was a cook. Her father, however, rose over several decades from working as a clerk in a mining company in Scotland to being a member of the London Metal Exchange. And that liberated her to be educated at the Manchester High School for girls. And then she also ended up in Girton College in Cambridge, where obviously there was a hotbed of campaigning women at the time. She took a first-class degree in medieval and modern languages, which then she used during the war to great effect, and actually that really accelerated her qualification because of that time during the war when she gave time to the MI5. She was a teacher though on graduating, and she absolutely hated the job. She thought after 4 years of teaching that it was not healthy for the children to have a teacher that hated their job, and her real ambition was to become a political secretary. And when the First World War came, she was sent to Istanbul, and she started processing permit applications for those wishing to travel to war zones. She used her many languages that she learned, again, really amazingly well. And as it happened, a solicitor was trying to enlist Alfred Baker. He was a partner in a law firm, and he was so impressed by her efficiency and behavior in this clerk role that he promised her that after the war was over, he will take her in to his law firm. So when the Sex Disqualification Removal Act 1919, which opened, as I said, the doors for women to join the legal profession, Morrison seized the opportunity and Baker kept his word. He had her into his firm. And that basically allowed her to waive some of the waiting in terms of taking your Law Society exams, passing, and then actually being admitted. So I tell you about Carrie because Carrie worked right here at Toynbee Hall in her job and her voluntary work representing these sex workers. And she used to say about them, those poor women, at a time when society largely shunned them. Her empathy was legendary. She defended men also who were being taken advantage of by their wives, and even shielded her young male clerk from the brutal details of her cases, believing in fairness for all. Her commitment to pro bono work was matched by her drive for reform. In 1931, she became the first woman to address the Law Society's annual provincial meeting, arguing passionately for the creation of courts of domestic relations, special courts to handle family disputes in a less intimidating way. She advocated for divorce reform, not just in the abstract, but through lived experience. After her own divorce, she and her husband worked together to improve the process for others. Morrison's vision was always one of equality. She believed men and women should be treated fairly in the justice system, and she fought for this ideal in every case she took. I want to tell you about the legacy of these pioneers, which we unearthed through my tens of thousands of hours of voluntary time in the first 100 Years project, because we felt it's important to document and celebrate these women whose achievements in the law since 1919 are extraordinary. The project highlights stories of women who have championed access to justice, and, recent examples are right here on the stage. And also, I think, importantly, the work and the role women played in educating women as their rights were increasing. They didn't really understand them, and they stepped in to educate. So women lawyers, to conclude, have played a vital role in advancing women's rights and providing legal help to those who need it the most. Their stories, I think, are testament to the power of persistence, empathy, and commitment to justice. Today's women lawyers continue this proud tradition, ensuring that the fight for equality and access to justice endures. Their stories, I think, are full of grit, compassion, and courage. Remind us that the race for justice is ongoing, and every woman lawyer who gives her time pro bono is helping to carry the baton forward. So I hope you will also take some moments today to celebrate Carrie Morrison in her home, but also all these remarkable women, past and present, and be inspired and, continue the legacy, one pro bono case, one client, one act of courage at a time. Thank you.
Now, members of the audience, I heard a lot asked, but we would like to hear from you. I'm very pleased to welcome the man, Francis Carpenter, who has joined our panel, who is in charge of the Women's Advisory Clinic at Toynbee Hall. We invited questions as be submitted in advance. While you're thinking about your questions, perhaps I'll just start with one or two of those. And I'd like to start to the Minister, which is, how do you think the advice sector can better advocate for funding and expanding?
You can lobby me hard in the drinks reception afterwards. Look, I think one of the points that was made earlier, and I think one of the things that Toynbee does so well is to co-locate different strands of advisory support in one place, because very often what feels or is a debt problem can manifest itself as a legal problem that can impact family relations, employment relations. And so very often you need like the whole package. And I think that one of the things that we're trying to do in the Ministry of Justice, and I think it's helpful for the sector, the advice sector, to be aware, is that we're trying to take a bit more strategic approach to the advice sector, the way we fund it, to be able to share best practice through our strategic delivery group that was set up earlier this year and is working with the sector, listening to what the sector is telling us. Yes, it's about more money, but it's also about sharing best practice and what is most impactful, and how do we make sure, as I said earlier, that legal support is tailored to the needs of the communities that it serves. And what is needed in a place like Tower Hamlets might look very different to the sort of legal support that's needed in a rural part of North Norfolk. And it's those providers that know what's needed. And so, you know, I think we invite that lobbying, we invite that input so that we can make sure that the funding and the support and the guidance that we provide as government, the coordinating function, meets the needs of the communities that I know that you serve so well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to raise now a question to Francis, and then I'd like to take questions from the floor. So get in and stop to do my to ask. So Francis, what would you like to see happen in the pro-governance sector?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I just want to give credit to Kay, who's in the audience, who is in fact in charge of the Women's Free Legal Advice Clinic. I am just a volunteer. I work at a law firm in the city, but I have been volunteering for nearly 9 years at this point. And I'd like to see more free legal advice available, whether that is an expansion of Toynbee's offerings or other services. I'd like to see more clinics, more user-friendly resources available to people, and better signposting of those resources. There are quite a lot of great websites with information, but people may even not know that that's available to them. I'd like to see more casework options. A lot of the people that we see in the clinic do need ongoing support, and that's not something that the Free Legal Advice Clinic can offer. And so I'd like to see more law firms providing more people to help with these. Particularly at the women's clinic, often we get people coming there, honestly, because it was the first place they could find an appointment. And I think that's just reflective of the huge demand outstripping the supply. I think that those of us who are fortunate enough to have access to the legal and the financial resources of firms should be better at sharing that with other people. So, yeah, more is what I'd like to see.
Fair enough. So I'd like to go out to the floor now. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can I have the mic? Oh, you can hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I'm loud enough. First and foremost, thank you very much for your keynote speech. You set the ball rolling. I must say. I have a question for you, young lady. Sarah Sackman, if I remember.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. I'm trying to get around at what is the present government doing, what they said they promised, and how are they delivering, and what they said they would do, and what they cannot do, or why they cannot do, what are the KPIs they use to measure their performance. I'm looking for all these kinds of data for my personal satisfaction, because I do in my own little way what I can do to offer to the Almighty all what He has been trying to in the past year, do it for the people. So this is what I'm trying.
Thank you for your question. I think we need to let the minister answer the question, which is how you measure success.
Yeah.
That's a great question. And as I said, when we came into government, we found that the justice system was on its knees. You'll have heard today that we've made a big announcement in respect of sentencing policy. David Gauke made his recommendations on the sentencing review, and we've responded to those. And that's in the context of a broken prison system and a broken court system that we inherited. So we came in day one in government and found the prison system on its knees, literally at the brink of collapse. So the first thing we've got to do is put the system on a sustainable footing. And the announcement today is one of the building blocks in that. The other building block in our criminal justice system is how we get the Crown Court backlog down. I know there are some criminal practitioners here. Those who serve in the system and all of us that are served by it know that one of the big problems we have as a result of these backlogs is it's taking far too long for cases to come to court. That's letting down victims. It's letting down people who are accused of crimes. It's letting down people who work in the system. It's letting down the taxpayer. And it's corrosive of justice, which ultimately impacts all of us as citizens. So our first task and our big priorities at the moment in the Ministry of Justice are about fixing our prisons, fixing our probation system, and getting that Crown Court backlog down. There's a whole lot more I could say about the civil justice system, whether we're talking about the employment tribunals, the immigration and asylum tribunals, family courts. There's a lot more I could say about that. But that's one of the areas of real focus. And you asked me what the KPIs are. Well, if we can implement the sentencing review and see that backlog start to head down in the right direction by the end of this Parliament, I would regard that as a success. And in the area of legal aid, making that investment, making sure it's sustained, and making sure we get transformation of the digital platforms that support it, I would regard that as a measure of success.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bottomless.
Only a mic.
You will need a microphone.
Well, no, sir. Yeah, I've got it. Got you. Well, Jared, I don't
Thank you. I think Alexandra will know where I'm coming from on this question. I'm always intrigued when we discuss pro bono work in the way it's performed in the legal profession and the way it's carried out with other professions. My own is management consulting, but I'm thinking also of technology, marketing, chartered surveyors, and so on. In those situations, the individual bears the cost and gives their time, whereas in the legal profession, it seems that pro bono work is actually people paid for by their firms being allowed to work for non-fee-paying clients, which I think is different. Now, I'm not criticizing that, but I think there's an opportunity for what I would call adult volunteering. Research done for the Charity Commission and others show that there's a huge billions of hours spent by adult volunteers when they've retired from their full-time day job to do good things through pro bono support. I'm puzzled why the legal profession hasn't picked that up and provided a mechanism whereby when you retire from your firm, you don't stop doing pro bono work, you actually do more.
Just think on them. Can I answer that? I think the biggest problem, to be honest, is insurance. Because I don't know about the origin chartered surveyors. It may well be that management consultants and chartered surveyors are self-carrying professional indemnity insurance. But unfortunately, we live in a really quite litigious society, and people don't get the result they want. They quite often blame and have some good advice. And I think that has been a real barrier for lawyers to become involved in pro bono without the support. I mean, my own firm, for example, it assures all its solicitors, if they act pro bono, involved in custody, it's a matter of regret to me that during that time, i.e. while they're in the firm, they don't do one pro bono activity. But I think the real challenge is once retired, who's going to pay for their insurance? And I don't know whether the Toynbee Hall, for example, pays for professional indemnity insurance with PCMB you buy. I just seen that in LV, so obviously that is not married. And I think it puts out a very good challenge. Why don't not when they're tired made use of and took advantage of? I think, again, one of the issues and one of the challenges, one of the reasons I joined the union, is the law changes so quickly. But I think you get very out of date very quickly. I mean, I'm honest myself. I have practiced as a solicitor for a very long time. And I say to my colleagues, and I can see one of us here that I'm there, that I would be positively dangerous if I was to attend us to buy legal advice on what was, for many years, my particular specialisation. So I think there are a number of factors, but I think maybe the main goal that it is very done is actually a very important one, which is why are more people not doing? I honestly don't know the answer to that.
So the opportunity to be fair, just
Absolutely, I agree. Yes. Any more questions before we bring us? That's a cue, by the way, to hear more questions. Sure.
Why he said one more is a picture and then for that comes in just now. But that's the daily something that's not supposed to. But that beings shafting and the serious issue of things like the access to all there of harm is your best thing.
I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that, and I think it's a challenge actually whenever you have the David and Goliath dynamic that I see so often in courts and tribunals. And actually, you could raise that question. I was involved actually in an employment mediation. I am an accredited mediator, but my career didn't really take me that way. But what really struck me about employment matters that I saw mediated was that there was an individual who had many, many grievances against your employer and had to be a very large, well-known firm. And these turned out with all their lawyers and QCs and so on. And the individual was represented pro bono, I might say. And it was a very successful mediation because in separate sessions, each party were asked what they wanted out of it. To cut the whole story short, the 4-week employment tribunal hearing that was due to take place at the end of the month was, after only 2 hours of mediation, resolved to both parties' satisfaction. And to my immense surprise, the person who burst into tears when this settlement was signed was not a claimant, but actually the HR manager that was found. And he was clearly ready, having to go into the witness box and defend what she obviously personally regarded as an indefensible position. So I agree with you that sometimes the employers are very well represented, even though their case is not very good, whereas the claimant is not represented at all. And the legal system does not deal well with that dynamic. So I think it is a massive challenge, massive all the time myself. And there is not a very straightforward answer to that very straightforward question. Just come, yes. Last question.
I'll try to keep it short. Alex and Sarah Sackman, thank you to all the inspirational speakers. To the gentleman who asked why professionals shouldn't carry on working beyond retirement, I think Alex is a prime example of continuing to do all sorts of things pro bono and for the public good in the widest sense. And good luck to you. Could I just throw out a challenge? Those of us, I'm a solicitor now retired and doing the same sort of thing, and I've been here for a very long time. Could I just throw out a challenge to the Law Society and the Bar Council to suggest that, as the American Bar Association has done with your American firms, perhaps voluntarily and then perhaps compulsorily, just as we have to undertake continuing professional development and education to keep ourselves up to date, there be a requirement for some pro bono help contributed by all people on the roll or at the bar. And I throw that as a challenge, having myself enjoyed as a young lawyer the benefits of the experience which pro bono work gives you, and having encouraged people in my firm, Alex's firm, to do the same. I think a lot more people would be encouraged to take that on, and that might solve some of the public funding problems, which I'm sure the government is struggling with. Thank you.
Well, thank you for starting that very positive note. I love that you ran. I'd like to thank very much for also because I'm calling you Holly, and I think you all are very good. So now I am the years and the drinks and